Okay, so are you ready to dive into a classic?
Always up for a classic. What do we have this time?
This time it's Dale Carnegie's How to Win Friends and Influence People.
Ah, a classic for a reason.
I know it. What's amazing to me is how relevant it still is today.
Totally. It's almost a century old, but the insights are timeless. Human nature doesn't really change all that much, even if technology does.
Exactly. Carnegie seemed to tap into something fundamental about human interaction stuff that helps you navigate, well, pretty much any social situation.
Absolutely. And he kicks things off with this story, right? It's about two-gun Crowley.
Oh yeah, the infamous cop killer.
Exactly. Even facing the electric chair, he refused to take any responsibility for his actions, said he was defending himself.
Wow. Talk about an extreme example of self-justification. But I guess, in a way, it shows something we all do, right?
Oh, absolutely. On some level, we all justify our actions. It's this deep-seated need to see ourselves in a positive light, even if it means, bending the truth a little. Or a lot, in Crowley's case.
It's like that old saying, everyone's the hero of their own story.
Exactly. And it's fascinating. Even Abraham Lincoln struggled with this.
Wait, really? Lincoln?
Yeah.
The guy known for being so level-headed.
I know, right? But even he had his moments. Remember that letter he sent to General Meade? The one where he basically rips into him for letting a prime opportunity to crush the Confederacy slip away.
Oh yeah, I vaguely remember that one. Wasn't it pretty scathing?
Understatement. He was furious. He even wrote, let me see if I can find the exact quote. Ah, here it is. Your golden opportunity is gone, and I am distressed immeasurably because of it.
Ouch. Talk about a verbal beatdown. I
Oh,
bet that went over well.
well, the thing is, Lincoln later admitted he was in the wrong for sending that letter.
He did. Wow, that's surprising.
Right. But it's what makes what he did next so powerful. He owned up to his mistake. He even wrote to another general, Hooker, I believe it was, and said something like, I have just thought it proper to show you this, lest I should at some time think it necessary to give you a different order. It's like he was preemptively apologizing for being harsh.
That's incredible. It takes a lot of courage to admit when you're wrong, especially when you're in a position of power.
It really does. And it completely changes the dynamic, don't you think? Imagine if Lincoln had approached me differently from the start. Instead of that scathing letter, what if he had started by acknowledging his own part in the situation? Maybe questioning if his own communication had been clear enough.
It's disarming, for sure. If someone is willing to acknowledge their own shortcomings up front, it makes you want to hear them outright.
Precisely. It instantly builds trust and makes the other person much more receptive to what you have to say.
So, less criticism, more self-awareness, more humility.
Exactly. And, on the flip side of that is genuine interest in others.
Okay, so how do we do that? How do we cultivate genuine interest?
Well, Carnegie has this great anecdote about being at a dinner party, and he ends up sitting next to this, get this, botanist.
A botanist. I bet they had riveting conversations about fertilizer.
Funny. But here's the thing. Carnegie admits he knew nothing about plants, but he was curious about the botanist's work.
So he actually asked questions.
He did. He asked questions and just listened, really listened, as the botanist talked about his research.
And I'm guessing the botanist was thrilled to have a captive audience.
You bet. They talked for ages, and by the end of the night, the botanist was convinced that Carnegie was one of the most interesting people he had ever met.
So the key takeaway is,
It's not about being interesting. It's about being interested. That's the foundation of genuine connection.
so left criticism, more curiosity. It's kind of a refreshing approach, right?
It is. And, it's not just about being nice or avoiding conflict.
Right, it's about influence too, right?
Exactly. Carnegie argued that genuine interest paves the way for effective influence.
So how does that work? How do we bridge that gap from understanding to actually getting people on board with what we want?
Well, Carnegie laid out 6 principles for making people want to cooperate.
Oh, I love a good list. Lay it on me.
Okay, so principle number 1 might seem surprisingly simple.
Okay, let's hear it.
It's all about the power of a smile.
A smile. Really? That's it?
It sounds simple, but Carnegie was adamant about this. He said it's contagious, even over the phone.
Wait, you think so?
Absolutely. Think about it. People can hear it in your voice.
That's true. A smile does change how you sound.
Right. It's all about setting a positive tone. A smile, whether it's in person or coming through the phone, it signals warmth, approachability. It just naturally makes people more open to what you have to say.
It's like that instant mood booster.
Yeah.
Okay, so first impressions matter. What else? What's next on the list?
Remembering names. And I don't just mean recognizing someone when you see them, I mean really remembering their name.
Okay, I'll admit this is where I struggle. I can never remember names.
Oh, me too. It's a skill, for sure. But it's worth cultivating because Carnegie was adamant about this one. He said remembering someone's name makes them feel valued, seen, important even. He even talks about Napoleon III. Can you believe it?
Napoleon, what did he do?
Napoleon was apparently famous for using these memory techniques to remember the names of, well, everyone he met.
Talk about making an impression. Okay, I'm starting to see a theme here. It's about making people feel seen and valued. What's next?
Principle number 3 is all about being a good listener.
Oh, come on. Everyone thinks they're a good listener. What makes a good listener?
You're right. It's harder than it seems. But Carnegie highlighted this fascinating study where researchers analyzed thousands of phone conversations. Want to guess what they found?
I have no idea. What was it?
The most frequently used word, I.
We love to talk about ourselves, don't we?
It's true. And Carnegie's point is that this isn't a bad thing. It's just human nature. We all have a story to tell. We all want to feel heard.
Okay, so how does that translate into being a good listener?
It means asking questions, really listening to the answers, not just waiting for your turn to talk, and making the other person feel heard and understood.
So less about being interesting and more about being, wait for it, interested.
You got it.
See what I did there?
Ah, I see what you did there.
Okay, so we're smiling, we're remembering names, we're genuinely listening. What else? Give me more.
All right, principle number 4. Carnegie talks about the importance of framing conversations in terms of the other person's interests. He has this great story, you ready for this, about a bread factory owner.
A bread factory owner. This sounds riveting. I'm on the edge of my seat.
He was totally against buying any new equipment, and the salesman was getting nowhere until he switched gears and started asking about the owner's true passion, growing orchids.
Wait, he stopped talking about bread
Yeah.
and started talking about orchids. Why?
Exactly. And get this, the salesman didn't even bring up the new equipment until the very end of their conversation. He spent the entire time talking to the factory owner about orchids, asking questions, listening as the owner shared his vast knowledge on the topic.
So he completely changed tactics, and it worked.
It did. By the end of the conversation, the bread factory owner had warmed up to the salesman so much that he agreed to buy the equipment.
Wow. That's amazing. So what's the takeaway here?
It's about finding common ground. By tapping into the other person's passions, you build rapport. It's about making a connection, and that's what ultimately makes people more receptive to your ideas.
It's like you're speaking their language. Okay, so find common ground, make that connection. What's next?
Carnegie also talks about the importance of making people feel important, and he means sincerely. He shares this story about an old aunt who was getting ready to give away her prized possession, a Packard.
A Packard? What's a Packard?
It was a luxury car, very valuable. But this aunt, she was getting on in years, didn't drive it anymore, and was ready to see it go to a good home. Well, one day, she's having tea with a friend, and the friend was admiring her house, but she was so genuine in her admiration, so effusive, that the aunt was really touched.
What happened? Did you give her the car?
She did. She gave her the Packard.
Wow, that's incredible. All because her friend made her feel appreciated.
Exactly. We all want to feel important, valued, right. And when that need is met, it can trigger incredible generosity.
Okay, I'm going to remember that one. Make people feel important. Okay, so that was number 5, right? What's the last principle?
Carnegie saved the best for last with this one. He argues for appealing to nobler motives.
Nobler motives? What does that even mean?
He uses the example of John D. Rockefeller Jr., who is dealing with this really tense labor strike. Instead of approaching the workers as adversaries, he appealed to their sense of family and community. He reminded them that they all shared the same goal to provide for their families and create a better future.
So it's about finding that common ground, that shared human experience.
Exactly. And it worked for Rockefeller. By framing the situation in terms of their shared values, he was able to de-escalate the tension and find a resolution that worked for everyone.
It's kind of beautiful when you think about it. Even in the midst of conflict, there's this potential for connection.
Exactly. It's about appealing to the best in people, reminding them of their shared humanity, and the positive impact they can have on the world.
Okay, so we've talked about the importance of genuine interest, avoiding unnecessary criticism, and even remembering names, which I'm still working on, by the way. But let's be real, even with the best intentions, disagreements happen. So how do we navigate conflict effectively? Do we just keep a copy of Carnegie's book handy as a weapon?
Well, funny you should say that, but Carnegie actually advised avoiding arguments whenever possible. He famously said that you can't win an argument because you either lose the argument or you lose the relationship.
It's so true, though, isn't it? When you think about it, what's the point of winning if you damage the relationship in the process?
Exactly. So he talks about the importance of approaching those disagreements, when they do happen, with the goal of understanding, not just winning.
That's such a crucial distinction. Easier said than done,
Yeah.
right? Especially when emotions are running high. So how do we put that into practice? How do we actually disarm anger and create space for productive dialogue?
Well, Carnegie suggests a few practical tactics. One is this almost magical phrase: I don't blame you one iota for feeling as you do. If I were you, I would undoubtedly feel just as you do.
It sounds so simple, but I can see how it would be disarming. It's like you're acknowledging the other person's feelings without necessarily agreeing with their perspective, right?
Exactly. And that's the key. Because when someone is upset, they want to feel heard and understood. This phrase does that. It validates their feelings without turning it into a battle of who's right or wrong.
So it's about separating the person from the problem.
Exactly. You're acknowledging their emotional experience without getting bogged down in who's right or wrong.
It reminds me of that story Carnegie tells about the time he accidentally mispronounced the name of a town during a broadcast.
Oh, yeah. And he got that scathing letter from a listener, right?
He did. And he said his first instinct was to fire back a response. But then he stopped himself.
Why? What made him change his mind?
He realized that getting into a back and forth argument wouldn't actually achieve anything.
He chose understanding over his own ego, basically.
Exactly. Instead of focusing on his need to be right, he put himself in the listener's shoes.
And what did he do?
He wrote back to the listener. He expressed genuine sympathy for their anger. He even apologized for the mispronunciation.
Wow. Talk about taking the high road.
And you know what? The listener was completely disarmed by his empathy.
I bet. There's real power in that.
There really is. It's like often people just want to be heard and acknowledged.
It's not always about being right or wrong. It's about understanding where the other person is coming from.
And that can be so powerful in diffusing conflict.
Absolutely. Speaking of which, Carnegie also talks about the importance of admitting your own mistakes.
Oh, I love this one. It's so counterintuitive, right? Our instinct is usually to deflect or downplay when we've messed up.
I know. But Carnegie argues that it can actually be incredibly disarming. He tells this great story about an architect who made a mistake on a client's blueprints.
Oh no, that's every architect's worst nightmare. What did he do?
So instead of trying to cover it up or downplay it, he went directly to the client, admitted the mistake, and said he'd fix it at his own cost.
Wow. That's a bold move.
It is. But guess what? The client, instead of getting angry, was impressed by his honesty.
That makes sense though, right? It's about building trust, even when you've messed up.
Exactly. It's about saying, hey, I'm human. I make mistakes, but I'm also accountable, and I care about making things right.
It's such a good reminder that honesty and vulnerability, even when it's uncomfortable, can be so powerful.
Yeah.
So we've talked about handling disagreements gracefully, but what about inspiring action?
Aha, yes. This is where things get really interesting. How do you get people to do what you want? Well, Carnegie believes people inherently resist being told what to do.
I can relate to that.
Right. It's like that instant knee-jerk reaction to rebel, even if we know it's in our best interest. So instead of giving direct orders, he suggests phrasing requests as questions.
Oh, interesting. It's about inviting collaboration instead of dictating.
Exactly. For example, instead of saying, clean the stockroom, you could ask, what do you think about reorganizing the stockroom to make it more efficient?
I love that. It's subtle, but it completely changes the dynamic. It gives the other person ownership.
It does. It taps into their need for autonomy.
Which reminds me of that great anecdote about Chaliapin, the opera singer.
Oh, yes. He was notorious for canceling performances last minute, wasn't he?
He was, but his manager had this brilliant strategy.
What did he do?
Whenever Chaliapin got nervous about a performance, his manager would rush to his side and suggest they cancel because he was worried about his terrible cold.
Wait, seriously, he played into it.
He did, and it worked like a charm.
Yeah.
By suggesting they cancel, the manager made Chaliapin feel like he was the one in control.
And of course, he didn't want to cancel.
Exactly. He always ended up performing. It's amazing how well we respond to feeling valued, respected, and in control, isn't it?
It is. And that's what makes these principles so powerful.
It's like we've uncovered this treasure trove of timeless wisdom, right? This deep dive into Carnegie's book has given us so much to think about.
It really has. And the best part is, they're not just concepts to be memorized. They're skills to be practiced, honed.
Absolutely. So as you go about your day, think about the interactions you have. How can you apply even one of these principles?
Exactly. Start small, experiment.
Maybe it's offering a sincere compliment, or asking a question instead of giving an order, or just taking a moment to really listen to someone's perspective. It all makes a difference. And on that note, until next time, happy connecting.